Greetings. In 1993, Lorena Bobbitt cut off her husband's penis, John Bobbitt, and threw it outside, then called 911, and the medical personnel were able to find his penis, bring it to the hospital, and they were able to reattach it. This was a case that really brought a lot of public attention to a variety of issues. First, the bizarreness of the case, or the nature of the case. Secondly, there were allegations of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse by Lorena Bobbitt's husband, which he was later found not guilty. And Lorena Bobbitt was found to be not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a psychiatric evaluation center for 45 days, evaluated, treated, and then released. The big question, of course, revolves around the sentencing from our perspective, as well as the trial. And we also begin to note that in this case there are some significant differences of opinion in the public. For example, looking at a 1994 January the Gallup Poll Monthly Journal, the Gallup poll asked, "As you may know, on Friday, Lorena Bobbitt was found not guilty by reason of insanity. From what you know about the case, do you think the verdict was right or wrong?" 31% of the men said it was right, compared to 57% of the women who said it was right. So that's a big gender difference there. Men were much more likely to believe it was a wrong decision. In another question, they asked, regardless of the verdict in the trial, do you think Lorena Bobbitt's actions against her husband were completely justified, somewhat unjustified, or completely unjustified? When I put together the two categories, completely justified and somewhat justified, 33% of the men agreed with that, compared to 51% of the women. So again, women were much more likely to see the Lorena Bobbitt's actions of cutting off her husband's penis as justified. In fact, a majority, 51%, although a third of the men did. In this case, one of the reasons presented in court for Lorena Bobbitt's actions was that she alleged that her husband had been physically, emotionally, and sexually abusive, and she did this to protect herself and out of fear. And there was a lot of debate about what other options she would have, and did she need to cut off his penis as a self-defense mechanism at that particular time, or was it some kind of battered women's syndrome, or irresistible impulse, or mental disorder, or a variety of things going on. These were all debated in the court system, and of course the court of public opinion. Now, since this case happened in 1993, it was a long time ago, I remember the case well because working in the field, I paid close attention not only to the trials, but also to the public reaction. And again, what was interesting is I ended up in the same location when the verdict was presented, and that is at this community college that I taught at a while back, where they had televisions in the cafeteria that people were glued to. I think I mentioned before that I was there during the O.J. Simpson verdict of the criminal trial, and I was also there for the Bobbitt verdict. Again, an interesting response, and that is some people were cheering and clapping, and some people were angry and yelling, no, it wasn't right. A big difference there. And of course, there is a lot of debate on what options were available to women who were in domestic violence situations as far as getting assistance and help. So in a similar way, this brought attention to the problems of interpersonal violence, similar to the case in the O.J. Simpson trial. So the other feature, of course, is looking at the nature of the verdict, the not guilty by reason of insanity. And of course, we might question, well, was it the act? And would have it made a difference, for example, if when Mr. Bobbitt came home, Mrs. Bobbitt shot him, or Mrs. Bobbitt stabbed him in the neck? So the nature of the crime was extremely relevant, I think, as well. There were a lot of jokes generated, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of National Enquirer type exposés and information. Interestingly enough, there are jokes that follow, of course, and the public opinion about these two individuals. My understanding is that Mr. Bobbitt had his penis reattached and later became a porn actor, and then later became a minister, I believe. I believe Mrs. Bobbitt later married, and I'm not sure what she's doing today. And again, it's cases like this that really become famous in the court of public opinion and the media, being all over this. And also, all of a sudden, I remember that there was the presentation of, there's copycat crimes now, that we saw a couple other cases that occurred where women sliced into or sliced off their husband's penis as a self-defense mechanism. And, the question, of course, is this something that rarely occurs, and it's just when we see a case, then the other cases come forward? Because I think a couple of them were actually in other countries. So there's that search for that. It was a fascinating case to watch from a variety of perspectives. That's, first of all, the public opinion, how the media discussed it and presented it. The media gets all squirmy and have problems discussing things of sexual nature. There's also the aspect of extreme violence here alleged by Mr. Bobbitt and Mrs. Bobbitt, or I should say a variety of scenarios that involve different types of violence were alleged in the two courtrooms. The most fascinating thing for me, though, is from what I read, is that Mrs. and Mr. Bobbitt, who had separate cases. One was a case against John Bobbitt for raping his wife, and that he was found not guilty. And then the other case was for Mrs. Bobbitt cutting off her husband's penis. But what was interesting about the case is that they had the same prosecutor. That, to me, is fascinating from what I read. So, this is just a brief overview of a case that, again, we saw a huge amount of attention to back in 1993, 1994, and then it kind of ended, we didn't hear much. I think a number of years later, both Mr. and Mrs. Bobbitt divorced, and I think later on they appeared on Oprah and tried to gather some attention on the talk shows, and the rest is really history. But again, I think another area to think about is the whole idea of not guilty by reason of insanity, and Mrs. Bobbitt spending 45 days in a evaluation center and then being released. So in a sense, she was sentenced to a 45-day scenario. And, a lot of people argue, was that accurate or not accurate, or if she really was insane, did she become not insane in 45 days, or was she insane at the time of the crime but then wasn't? Or, a lot of issues really revolve around that insanity defense as well. That's what I wish we spent more time on in the media and the press and interviews with professionals and the like, is bringing in that whole notion of the insanity defense and how it's applied in the different rules in different states and so forth. So just a brief overview of one famous crime and trial back in the 90s. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.